Why are the tribulation saints to pray about the Sabbath day flight? Look with me at Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. Matthew 24, 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So when the abomination of desolation is set up, those that are in Judea should flee into the mountains. Notice verse 20, Matthew 24, verse 20. But pray ye that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. The question we want to take up is, why are the trib saints to pray that their flight not be on the Sabbath day? I'll give you an outline of the 2 points we're going to cover. Number one, is the distance of the tribulation saints' flight limited by the Sabbath day? 2, the real reason the tribulation saints should pray that their flight not be on the Sabbath day. So let's look at question number one. Is the distance of the tribulation saints' flight limited by the Sabbath day? Get Acts chapter 10, verse 28. Acts chapter 10 and verse 28. And he said unto them, Ye know how that it is an unlawful thing for a man that is a Jew to keep company or come unto one of another nation. But God hath showed me that I should not call any man common or unclean. Now what I want you to notice, as late as Acts 10, the Kingdom Church is following the Old Testament law. You can see something similar in Acts chapter 21, verse 20. Acts chapter 21 and verse 20. Acts 21, 20. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, Thou seest, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the law. What I want you to notice is that the tribulation saints, those members of the Kingdom Church that are alive during Daniel's 70th week, they will be observing the Old Testament law. Get with me Acts chapter 1, verse 12. What we're now going to look at is we're going to look at the length of a Sabbath day's journey in the Scriptures. So Acts chapter 1 and verse 12. Then returned they unto Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is from Jerusalem a Sabbath day's journey. So what we see there is from Mount Olivet to Jerusalem, whatever that distance is, that is a Sabbath day's journey. Get with me Mark 11, verse 1. Mark chapter 11 and verse 1. And when they came nigh to Jerusalem unto Bethphage and Bethany, at the Mount of Olives, he sendeth forth two of his disciples. What I want you to notice there is Mark 11, verse 1 tells you that Bethany is at the Mount of Olives. Look with me at Luke 19, verse 29. Luke chapter 19 and verse 29. And it came to pass, when he was come nigh to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples. So what we saw there from two different verses is Bethany is at the Mount of Olives. Let's get one more verse. Get John chapter 11 and verse 18. John chapter 11 and verse 18. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off. So from Bethany to Jerusalem, it's 15 furlongs. So let's put everything we know together. So from Jerusalem to Olivet, it's a Sabbath day's journey. Olivet is the same thing as the Mount of Olives. So Jerusalem to Olivet is a Sabbath day's journey. We then saw that Bethany is located at the Mount of Olivet, and then we saw that from Bethany to Jerusalem is 15 furlongs. So what did we learn? A Sabbath day's journey is 15 furlongs. In other words, a Sabbath day's journey is 1.875 miles. A furlong is an eighth of a mile. So 15 furlongs is a mile and then 7/8 of a mile. In other words, it's 1.875 miles. So a Sabbath day's journey is a little bit under 2 miles. So now let's consider the question. Is the tribulation saints' flight, when the abomination of desolation is set up, is that flight limited by the restriction on a Sabbath day's journey? In other words, under the Old Testament law, on a Sabbath day, you shouldn't go on a long journey. There were only short distances that were permitted. What was permitted as a Sabbath day's journey was 1.875 miles, no more than that. So let's think through this just for a minute. If the Sabbath day limitation applied to the tribulation saints' flight, then many in Judea would not even be able to leave Judea because Judea's dimensions itself exceed 1.875 miles. In other words, if when the abomination of desolation is set up, and if it's set up on a Sabbath day, and the kingdom saints, the tribulation saints, they have to follow the Old Testament law, are they in a situation where they can't even flee Judea because they are limited by the 1.875 mile limitation? Here's what I think the answer is to that. Get with me Mark chapter 2, verse 27. And as a preface, I will say this. In fleeing from the abomination of desolation, a flight of unlimited distance is permitted on the Sabbath day. That's my assertion. Let's see if I can prove that. So look at Mark 2, verse 27. And he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Get Mark 3, verse 4. Mark chapter 3 and verse 4. And he saith unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, or to do evil, to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. Get Luke 6, verse 9. Luke chapter 6 and verse 9. Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? Get Luke 14, verse 5. Luke chapter 14, verse 5. And answered them, saying, which of you shall have an ass or an ox fallen into a pit, and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? Now, what do all those verses on the Sabbath day mean? Well, Mark 2:27 says that the Sabbath is made for man, and not man for the Sabbath, meaning that the Sabbath was given for man to rest, but the Sabbath was not given in a way that it prevented man from doing things for the man's own good on the Sabbath. The reason we know that, Mark 3, verse 4 says this, Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath days or to do evil? Well, good is permitted. You shouldn't do evil, but you can do good. And then it says to save life or to kill. In other words, if you need to do something on the Sabbath day that is work, but you need to do it to save life, it's okay to do it. So for example, if you have an ass or an ox that falls into a pit on the Sabbath day, should you say, well, I'd like to save my ox's life, but it's a Sabbath day, and so I'm not going to do any work, and I'm just going to let the ox suffer? Well, that's not the scriptural approach. What you should do is you should do good on the Sabbath day. You should act to save life on the Sabbath day. That is why the Sabbath day's journey limitation would not apply to a tribulation saint who was fleeing the abomination of desolation on the Sabbath day. So let me give you an example. Let's make it really clear. Let's say you are an Old Testament Jew, you're under the Old Testament law, and someone is chasing you with a knife on the Sabbath day. So you run away, you flee from them, and you realize that you've just run the distance of a Sabbath day's journey. So you get to 1.875 miles. Should you stop running at that point? Well, if you stop running at that point, the person that is chasing you with the knife is not complying with the Old Testament law. In other words, they're trying to harm you. So if you turn around to him and you say, look, you need to stop chasing me. This is a Sabbath. On the Sabbath day, we can only walk so far. We've both walked the appropriate distance. You just need to cool, just calm down, and then we'll resume this on the following day. Well, if you did that, you would get stabbed. It would be totally ineffective because people that are would-be murderers are not concerned about the details of the Old Testament law, and they're not going to obey the rules of red light, green light, or children's games and say, okay, I have to stop and I can't move again until you say so. Well, the beast is not going to comply with the Old Testament law. All of this is to say the following. Is the Sabbath day's journey limitation something that controls the tribulation saints when they flee the abomination of desolation? And the answer is no, it's not. Even though they're under the Old Testament law, it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, and it is lawful and proper to flee the beast, to flee the abomination of desolation. So if that's the case, that brings us to the second question, or the second point, which is the real reason tribulation saints should pray that their flight not be on the Sabbath day. And it doesn't have anything to do with the length of the journey. Go back with me to Matthew 24, verse 20. Matthew 24, verse 20. And let's try to understand the real concern with the flight. Matthew 24, verse 20. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. Well, why does the verse tell them to pray that their flight not be in winter? The obvious answer is it's harder to travel in winter, isn't it? It's colder, it can be snowier, travel is more difficult, it's just more challenging to travel in the winter. Well, that's why they're to pray that their flight not be in the winter. Why should they pray that their flight not be on the Sabbath day? And the answer to that, I think, is straightforward. What happens to people on the Sabbath day? Well, they're typically tired. Look with me at Exodus 35, verse 2. Exodus 35, verse 2. The reason for the existence of the Sabbath day is that after 6 days of work, man is typically exhausted, he's tired, and he needs the Sabbath to rest. Exodus 35, verse 2. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day there shall be to you an holy day, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. whosoever doeth work therein shall be put to death. So back to our original question, why are the tribulation saints to pray that their flight not be on the Sabbath day? It's not because of the limitation of the Sabbath day's journey. It's simply because fleeing on the Sabbath day would be harder, just as it would be harder to flee in winter, because travel would be harder. They should pray that their flight not be on the Sabbath day, because they'll already be exhausted and they will need to flee the abomination of desolation as quickly as they can. That's what we think is going on in the verse, but don't take our word for it. Search the scriptures, prove all things, hold fast to that which is good.